So on to Epstein did not kill himself. We're talking the destruction of the Nordstream 2 pipeline. And what we're talking about is what you're not supposed to talk about. And what you're not supposed to talk about is, use that little bit of gray matter between your ears and think with a little bit of common sense and say, I'm being told one of two things here. Or I'm being presented with arguments, not necessarily being told anything. I mean, there are facts that play into this situation that would bear on what the ultimate conclusion, which one is more likely than not. But based on your assessment of that, using your critical thinking skills, which again, according to the regime's mouthpieces in the media, you're not allowed to do, you might come to some conclusions that they don't approve of. And believe me, when you do, they will let you know about it. So a couple weeks have gone by since this one happened, so it's not exactly front of news, but it still is a big issue because it moves.
Well, it wasn't front of news to begin with.
Well, I think it was at the time. I saw it everywhere.
They covered it, but they weren't really covering it.
Well,
it wasn't like Trump being syndicated with Russia.
No, but they were covering it by saying the Russians did it, the Russians did it, the Russians did it.
Yeah, and then in other news.
So anyway, the blowing up of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which for those of you who don't know, is the undersea pipeline which connects Russia directly with Germany. And it is to get natural gas energy, cheap energy, to the European continent. Well, the middle of the European continent, obviously Germany from Russia. Now, this is a jointly held infrastructure project between both Germany and Russia, and that's going to be important for a Biden quote about this, which we'll bring up here in a second. It's a jointly held infrastructure project. So it's not solely under the control of Russia, and it's not solely under the control of Germany. Both have a vested interest in this thing being an efficient use of the allocation of energy resources. And basically how it works is on Russia's end, when Germany or the European Union wants to buy fossil fuels to power for energy for the European continent, Russia basically flips the switch, lets the gas go, and Germany accepts it, and then they pay Russia. Now, obviously, as you know, because of the Ukraine war, this is a no-no. We're not supposed to buy things from Russia because by buying things from them is funding their war effort. And they're terrible, evil, no good, very bad people. And Putin needs to die and blah, 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 blah. So don't buy any gas from Russia.
All these are facts.
Well, you may have heard in the news over the last few weeks that energy prices are skyrocketing on the European continent, in particular in Germany, where, without getting into the weeds of that, German politicians for years have been moving to greener and greener energy policies, basically moving away from fossil fuels up to very recently shutting nuclear plants off in favor of renewables. Well, as we always warn you about, not just us, but as is always warned about, green energy is not super reliable. And so, supply and demand. You don't have enough energy production. It's getting ready to go into the winter season in Germany. There's a high demand for energy. So energy prices are skyrocketing. Now, just based on these set of facts, it would behoove both Russia and Germany to work together in terms of Russia has the energy, Germany needs the energy. The war is what it is, but they should work together for the betterment of at least the German people, right? So they don't have to pay their entire paycheck just to heat their houses for 5 minutes. But the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline doesn't exactly allow for that. And we're supposed to take from this that Russia did it. Russia blew up the pipeline, despite the fact that Russia gets at least some benefit from the pipeline being operational.
Well, who hasn't told them their wonderful wife, husband, whatever the fuck else you might be attached to, that you live in the same domicile to? Honey, I think we left the kitchen light on. I'm going to go shut it off. They trundle down there. It's probably 11 o'clock at night. They're a little sleepy-eyed. They're not paying too much attention. They just go, clear! And throw a hand grenade in there and blow up their entire kitchen. Because goddamn, the light's off. Wouldn't it make more sense just to turn off the switch? Like, just to make sure it's operational? Like, if you control the switch, you don't need to blow the whole thing up. So I don't know what possible benefit, other than to play this complete psyop game to where, like, the Russians did it to make it look like the U.S. did it, so that the U.S. would benefit more financially, which would make them soft, which would make Russia more virulent and strong and be able to take them over very quickly.
Yeah.
Fucking 3D chess, son. Okay?
Yeah.
We're not playing checkers. There's no kings out here. It's just the taken.
Now, as David said, if Russia truly wanted to shut down the pipeline entirely, they have a switch on their end. They just shut it down. They don't put anything through the pipe. There's no reason to destroy it. So when some people started to point out the incentives on both sides here, they started to think, well, we've been told that Russia were the ones that did it. We don't really have any proof of that. But, I mean, of course, nobody on the Western side, whether it be Germany or the United States or Great Britain or any of those allied NATO member nations, none of them would do it, right? Because, again, in the very Manichaeanist way that the whole Russia-Ukraine war has been talked about, is that it's light versus dark. And that to blow up a potential source of energy for German citizens who are being crushed with high energy bills would be a very bad, evil, terrible, no good, very bad thing to do, right? So, of course, the good side didn't do it. Only the bad, dark, evil, terrible, no good, bad side did it, Russia. Now, when some people started to point out that the incentives don't seem to align because A, as David said, Russia could just turn off the pipeline. B, Russia, if we take the regime's mouthpieces at face value and they say, Ukraine is winning, they're pushing back, Russia's being backed into a corner, yada, yada, yada. Okay, let's take that narrative at face value. If you're Russia, just think for 5 seconds. I know you're not supposed to do this, but try to put yourself in the other side's shoes for 5 seconds and say, if I'm Vladimir Putin or if I'm Russia, I have a very big trump card up my sleeve. And that card is, I have cheap, reliable energy. And I know the European continent needs it. Now, the European continent, with the U.S. backing, has decided to put massive sanctions on me, which hurt me politically if I'm Vladimir Putin, or me as an entire country if I'm the Russian citizens. But I always have this trump card. So if I want those sanctions lifted, or if I want to not be punished so much for what we feel is a justified war in Ukraine, my trump card is, hey, Germany, you need some energy? It's getting cold over there. Your people are freezing. I can just flip the switch over here. You just say the word. Oh, but if you say the word, I'm going to need you to ease up on those sanctions on me. But if I'm Russia and I blow up the pipeline, I have now just taken that massive trump card out of my hand. I've lit it on fire.
It's 3D chess. You don't understand. I'm going to make you think that I'm all hurting for money. And then when you come in to kill me, I'm going to kill all the rest of you. Because I'm strong. I'm faking an injury. Oh, I can't lift my right arm. And then crack right over the top. Dumbass. Why don't you think about that, Dane?
Yeah, I guess that my version of chess only takes place on, a flat board.
America.
So I can't think too many steps ahead. But again, using your gray matter and critically thinking for 5 seconds, and I know it's hard to do, but putting yourself in the other person's shoes, it doesn't seem like you would, in Russia's position, caring for only Russia's interest, regardless of the evilness of their actions, why they would want to take essentially their queen off of the chessboard by blowing up Nordstream 2. Now, if you ask that question, according to the New York Times, you're a Russia sympathizing, probably bought and paid for, terrible, Trump supporting whatever. If you simply ask that question without going any deeper and looking at the other side of the coin is, well, who might have an incentive to blow this up? If I agree with you for 5 seconds that maybe Russia doesn't have that much of incentive, who does?
Well, the thing is like, and we bring it back to this all the time on the podcast, it's like, when did it become illegal to question? When did it become wrong to not just believe everything that you heard verbatim on the first try? Like, when did it become, I thought there was no dumb questions. There's no dumb questions, right? That's what you're always told in elementary school,
Allegedly.
high school, allegedly. But like now every question that you get, it's like the teacher's mocking, like, class, look at this stupid ass. I would blow up a pipeline to financially benefit myself and push my biggest adversary into a corner that they'll probably never make it out of. What? What? Come on, guys. All right, get out in the hallway, you fucking idiot. I can't even teach you algebra today. Oh.
Yeah. Well,
America. Like, I don't know.
Now, let's examine the other side of the coin. If we're trying to figure out who did this, the United States current sitting president Joe Biden in February of 2022, shortly before the Russian invasion into Ukraine, said in open, you can look up the clip. We'll link it at wmdpodcast.com/115. We'll put it under the videos on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey. You can watch the video yourself. Joe Biden in a press conference said that we, the United States, will, if Russia invades, will shut down Nordstream.
And they ask him, how are you going to do that?
And an astute reporter says, but Mr. President, how are you going to do that? Because it's not just Russia that controls the line. Germany has invested its own money into it. This is Germany, an ally of the United States, has invested its own money and has control over at least a portion of that infrastructure. How are you going to shut down Nord Stream 2? It wouldn't seem like you would want to do that to your ally. You would think that you would want their input in the situation.
Go on.
And Biden responds with, trust me, we will shut down Nord Stream. Now, again, that's a sitting U.S. president. And I just posit to the regime mouthpieces who now point out anybody who brings this up as probably a Russian sympathizer is, I would say, if Trump were in office and he were to make a statement like that, and then Nord Stream gets blown up. And remember, Trump was supposed to be the one who was the crazy, unhinged maniac who was going to make World War III happen. If he said that and Nord Stream blew up, would you not be rushing to the soapboxes to say, see, he did it. He made a threat. Da, 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 da. Now, again, I know Biden's your guy, and I know that his meaningless threat was just that, meaningless.
Let's be honest. If Biden's your guy, you're probably not watching this fucking podcast. Let's be honest.
But it wasn't just Biden. Former undersecretary of the Secretary of geez.
Take it again.
The U.S. State Department Undersecretary Victoria Nuuland, which we have. This isn't her first foray into the whole Russia-Ukraine thing. We talked about her several episodes ago and her involvement in the 2013 Euromaidan protest in Ukraine.
You're my dad?
Yes. Which was essentially a political coup overthrowing Viktor Yanukovych, who was a pro-Russian, democratically elected leader of Ukraine.
Tennis player, right?
Yeah, that guy. She made similar statements before Nord Stream was blown up. And we have current sitting U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken saying these same sort of things just a few weeks ago. So when you have a president, a former Secretary of State, Undersecretary, and the current Secretary of State all kind of speaking from the same playbook, it would seem to suggest to you that if the United States didn't blow up the pipeline, it seems to think that it would have a vested interest in that pipeline no longer existing. I mean, that's what they're telling you. So if they didn't do it and it just happened by some random or if Russia did it to themselves, the United States isn't exactly upset about this occurrence, at least according to the sitting president, sitting Secretary of State, and former Undersecretary. But again, you're not supposed to ask any of these questions because to assume that the light side of the ledger did anything wrong that would harm the German people, let alone the Russian people, is to make you a Russian Putin sympathizer.
Don't you understand? This is a very fluid situation. They probably haven't had this plan in place since 2014 or even been thinking about it since then. So and not to mention the fact that they're sympathizers. They're trying to help Ukraine out. So they're going in there just trying to help them out. If it is true that the United States sabotaged that thing, it's not like there's another Republican person that was in the White House with another cabinet around, 2005 fucking 6 around that came out and said that there were might have been plans to do this a long time ago. But it's not important, Dane. And I'm not speaking about. I'm not speaking about Conda Sneeza Bryce saying this in 2014.
Hey, listen, David. I'm actually glad that you brought her up, because in 2014 she wasn't Secretary of State as she was under George W. Bush.
She wasn't even in office.
She had no power. She was, but as secretaries of state come and go, generally speaking, they go to speaking events and they go to conferences, and their opinion is valued in some circles. And isn't it rather odd, not to David and I and those of you who are loyal listeners and watchers of the WMD podcast?
Don't you think?
But it's like that old Tom Woods law that no matter who you elect, you wind up with John McCain. And that Condoleezza Rice is a Republican under former President George W. Bush as Secretary of State. Yet she's saying 6 years ago essentially the same things that Victoria Nuuland and Anthony Blinken and Joe Biden are saying. And in the fact that it is in the United States' national interest to make sure that the United States is the sole supplier of energy to the European continent over and above Russia. If we were engaged in some sort of armed struggle, so to speak, or if not armed, at least a proxy war going on in, Ukraine, and that there's actually a financial hot war going on between Russia and the West, led by the United States in the form of sanctions and things like that. Is that Condoleezza Rice, as a Republican in 2014, is speaking from the same playbook as Nuuland, Blinken, and Biden. And what that shows you is what we bring up on this podcast frequently, is that no matter who you elect, you wind up with John McCain. The foreign policy establishment consensus in DC does not change. It does not matter who you elect. That unelected bureaucracy that has vested interests in making sure that their military-industrial complex keeps pumping out the tanks, planes, bombs, and bullets, and keeps getting paid to the tunes of billions and trillions of dollars from the American people to constantly gin up conflict all around the world that has absolutely precisely dick all to do with the actual national security of the American people who they're supposed to be responsive to, that those people and their policies never change. They always get their way, and their way is constant struggles, constant provocations for war, constant boogeymaning of somebody else. If it's not the Kaiser, then it's Hitler, and then if it's not Hitler, then it's Stalin, and then if it's not Stalin, then it's Saddam, and then if it's not Saddam, then it's Assad, and if it's not Assad, then it's Putin, and so on and so forth. And there's always a monster to slay. Some of those monsters are more real than others, but there's always monsters to slay. And wouldn't you just be totally shocked that this group of people, this foreign policy establishment consensus that never changes, are always the ones that have the solutions, and you should look to them and let them do whatever they want carte blanche. And they never make mistakes. They never do anything underhanded. They never, blow up a pipeline and blame it on their enemies. They don't do any of that ever. They're always to be trusted, and they're just the best people on earth, and they make all the right decisions.
Just to bow tie it, you mentioned Russia's biggest exports were predominantly oil, gas, and some minerals, right? What's the United States' biggest export?
Pharmaceuticals?
War.
Oh, of course, yeah.
War goods. War sundries.
Yeah.
When we were telling Saddam, we're behind you, but then we gave the Kurds a bunch of weapons behind his back, We've been doing it for a long time.
And his alleged weapons of mass destruction were weapons that we sold him to fight the Iranians in the 80s.
We might have had the receipts. That's why we thought that they were there, but God only knows where they were when we went in, excuse me. So,
and before we move on to the main, I just want to tie this together with, here is the Epstein moment. Here's the historical example, which isn't an exactly one-to-one comparison, but it really crystallizes for you that history didn't start yesterday, and that these people do the same types of shit again and again and again. In World War I, again, number one, not two. So Put Hitler and Nazis and people on train cars out of your mind. World War I was simply, old graybeards on the European continent that are fighting over centuries-old jealousies, right? This isn't racially charged or anything like that World War II was. The Entente powers versus the Axis powers. The Entente powers, or both sides, wanted desperately for the United States to come in on their side. And so before that's going to happen, they needed to fight a propaganda war before they got the U.S. to help them fight a real war. And when Great Britain declared war on Germany in World War I, the very first act of war they did, before they dropped a bomb or fired a single bullet, they cut the transoceanic telegraph line between Germany and the United States. Now, that would seem from a military strategic objective not to be a super high priority. But when you think about what it really was and how that war progressed and the propaganda that was pumped across the Atlantic from Great Britain to the United States to eventually bring the U.S. in, which helped the Entente powers win that war, it is an absolute hegemony over the narrative that's going on about the war. When the Germans couldn't communicate directly with the United States, the British had carte blanche to basically characterize the war in any way they wanted. They came up with fanciful tales about Germans bayoneting babies in their bassinets and cutting off the breasts of women and for no reason other than to just be absolutely barbaric. And the Kaiser was essentially a demon. And all of these propaganda narratives that the British pumped into the United States until the United States ultimately went in. Now, if it was capable of blaming the Germans for the cutting of their own transcontinental telegraph line, I'm sure the British would have done that. But that's way too obvious to say that they would have no vested interest in doing that. But don't let it be forgotten that they will, and what I mean by they is not just the British or the United States, but the people that are always looking for war, they will do whatever it takes to make sure that they have narrative control over whatever it is they want you to do. And in this case, although it's not a communication line between Russia and the West, by blowing up Nordstream 2, it harms Russia way more, and it harms the German people, but it harms Russia way more than the United States or any of the other NATO powers. And it gives them a convenient narrative to say Russia did it. And much in the telegraph cutting way, the mainstream media will cut off the conversation when you try to suggest maybe the incentives align for the United States or the West to have done this and not necessarily Russia. They've been doing it since even before World War I, but that's one big classic example. And so next time somebody tries to shut you down and say, well, there's no way the U.S. would have done this. That's just too terrible. The Russians did it and blah, blah, blah. Bring up the cutting of the transcontinental telegraph line between Germany and the United States in World War I and know that they have to have narrative control from start to finish. And they're doing the same thing here. History didn't start yesterday. They use the same playbook over and over again.
Well, it's a good thing that we live in a society where all of that is just conjecture. And they would never actually do that to this, and they're always honest with us.